Perfect. Okay. So next slide, please. I have nothing official to disclose. I will disclose that I've done public speaking before, but it's always a really big deal to me. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about this topic. And I've never done an online presentation before until yesterday when I tested this out on my friends at work. Just bear with me. I'm excited to talk. I'll try to keep it at a pace that makes sense. And so thank you for being here. Next slide, please. So, and then the next slide, you can go to the next slide then. That's my objective. Okay, so what I plan to do today is simply talk to you about my experience, how my experience as a renal dietitian prepared me with the thought of that I could become a living kidney donor. And then I will get into talking to you just my whole story about my good friend and the opportunity that presented itself to me. We'll talk about the process of the donation, the surgery, and then the kind of the larger story that goes with it, kind of that has come out of this experience. Next slide, please. Throughout this presentation, I want to talk about the power of the story. I love that term story. It just resonates with me. I think a story just paints a really good picture. You can't argue with someone's story. We understand, it kind of helps us put together facts and statistics and information, but it just makes it relatable. And I think a story can really inspire and give hope. So just kind of listen for that theme as I keep talking. Next slide, please. So first part of my talk is just talking about my background as a dietitian. Next slide, please. So I think we all know that life on dialysis is not easy. I became a renal dietitian kind of in the mid-90s when and I can't say that I really embraced the idea of being a renal dietitian back then. It was kind of a part-time position that opened up and at a time that when I was looking for a part-time work when my kids were being born. And so, but I've really grown to love and embrace the field of renal nutrition for so many reasons. One of the reasons is the ability to really develop long-term relationships with these patients and hear their stories. We really get to know our patients really well. And when we ask simple questions about how are you feeling? How is your appetite? What did you eat for breakfast? We really inevitably get into their story, their bigger picture. And we really gain their trust in that process, provided we've got good rapport. And they really tell us a lot of things. So, over the years, just getting to know these patients, the burden that is placed on them, on our patients, the pain, the time that's put into it, the dietary restrictions, which I myself would really have a hard time with, especially the potassium restriction and the fluid restriction would be really hard. The fatigue, and then especially what really resonates with me is the depression. It's just heartbreaking to see how many people with chronic disease really struggle with depression. And one thing I love about my job as a dietitian is I get to help patients really find ways that they can take control of their own health. I can help empower them, and I can just hopefully help give them some hope for that. Next slide, please. And as we all know, I think my years in dialysis I've been really listening to all of our interdisciplinary team meetings where we were talking to our patients about the importance of pursuing a kidney transplant, if at all possible. If you're at all a candidate, you need to be proactive in making that happen for yourself. And as good as dialysis is, it saves lives, it keeps people alive. Without it, people, obviously it's important, but we can't ever do the same thing with dialysis that we can do with a real healthy kidney. And so just some of the things that that we deal with are listed on this slide, as we all know. And as renal dietitians, a lot of the effort that we put into our counseling with patients has to deal with this cardiovascular complications, whether it's because of fluid status or whether it's because of bone mineral, phosphorus things, or whether it's due to potassium, but it's really all about the heart more than any other organ. And when I look at, say, if I ever run across an old list of mine of patients, maybe from 2 or 3 years ago, it's always kind of shocking to see how many of my patients aren't here anymore. That they've, some of them maybe because they got a transplant, but others because they haven't survived very long. And I ran across a statistic that said that 1 in 4 patients die within their first year of dialysis. And the 5-year survival rate is about 35%. And when I look at my own patient lists from years ago, it's like, yep, I think that holds true. Of course, it depends on the health of the patient. Next slide, please. So I've also been hearing our interdisciplinary team talk to our patients about why they should pursue kidney transplant. One thing we know is that it's going to extend your life, your quality of life, and your length of life. On average, much more than staying on dialysis. And you really can't measure that improved quality of life, just feeling better, being able to do more things, less restrictions on traveling, and then also the cost savings to the healthcare system in general. So many things that are benefits of doing kidney transplant. Next slide. And then another thing, just learning too about living donation versus deceased donor. Obviously, any kidney that is donated is so precious and so important. But with the living donation, there is definitely a benefit. Does anybody notice my typo in this slide? My husband pointed it out in the first bullet point. Yeah, I used the wrong version of the word weight, and I didn't even notice until my husband pointed that out. But yes, there's a shorter WAIT wait time for a living donation versus a deceased donor. I believe in the state of Wisconsin, I've heard the figure of 5 to 7 years is the average wait time, maybe less with some programs. But with a living donation, it's pretty much you get your donor lined up once you're on the list, and it could be good to go within several months. In fact, someone I talked to, the transplant coordinator, told me the fastest she's ever seen it all happen was 2 weeks from the time of workup to the time of surgery with a living donor. 2 weeks versus 5 to 7 years. So I had really decades to kind of contemplate the idea of being a living donor. Never really thought it would happen, just kind of thought, well, that would be really cool. That'd be nice. Next slide, please. Now we get to my favorite part of the story. I get to talk about my personal story with my friend Monica and the really good experience we had at Froedtert Hospital in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, near Milwaukee. Next slide. This is me on the left with my donor, Monica. And everything I'm going to say about Monica today, I have her full permission to say. In fact, she is very, very open about her story, and she loves to talk about her story. So she knows I'm doing this presentation, and she supports me fully. So Monica and I have been good friends for about 11 years. We met in about 2009. We each had a son at Milwaukee Lutheran High School. We happened to meet in a prayer group that met on Friday mornings. When I was working part-time, I was able to go to that. This prayer group was just an amazing group of women. Probably half of us were Caucasian, the other half was African American. Such a sisterhood, just wonderful people. And you really bond in a situation like that. And Monica especially was just a person that I just gravitated toward. She immigrated to the US from Tanzania in East Africa in about 1988. She has this beautiful accent. You have to listen carefully because she's got a pretty thick accent, but she's trilingual. She speaks Swahili and she speaks her own native village language in Tanzania, and then she speaks English very well. And at the time that I met her, she was going through, she had lupus, and so she was going through chemotherapy. And she was pretty sick and pretty frail. And because of that, she had lost her employment, and that had put her immigration status in jeopardy. And she's also a single mom, and she has my permission to share that she was actually homeless for a time, not when I met her, but she was homeless for a time with a child. And because of the kindness of the community, she's so well connected in her church community, in her African immigrant community. She got a lot of support and settled into an apartment, and just had a lot of people that came around her. So when I met her, I just was so struck by her joyful, positive attitude, her deep faith, her really, it was never about her. It was always looking to help other people that were in need. So one of the things that she was involved in was really kind of reaching out and helping to resettle other African immigrants in the Milwaukee area. I think she probably knows thousands of people. She's just very outgoing that way, and people really, really like her. And she was also would help to collect items that people would need if they were resettling here. So just really kind of a very, very selfless person. So I got to know her, and one of the things we used to do, I used to come over to her apartment. She loves vegetables, and this is a time when she was not yet on kidney disease. She did not yet have kidney disease, but she was really trying to follow a healthy diet. And she uses a lot of East African cooking. She does a lot of things with vegetables. So she would be just thrilled when I would bring her those huge zucchini from the garden that nobody wants because there's the size of a baseball bat. She would be thrilled to get my zucchini. She also liked pumpkin leaves, and I would, because those remind her of home, she cooks those up with a little bit of sodium of bicarbonate, as she calls it. And you have to cook it just the right way, otherwise they taste like felt. And she would use things like garlic and cilantro and chickpeas and ground turkey. So I would bring her vegetables, and I would come home with a feast of food that she gave me. And I would always smell like all the spices that she had cooking in her kitchen. We also like to go out to lunch together, and I would, one of the things we like to do is go to Chipotle, and I would kind of help her choose some of the lower potassium food items that she could pick. And this was later on in our friendship when she was kind of in kidney disease and having to watch her potassium. So, and we would just sit and talk for hours. Around 2014 is when Monica's kidney disease deteriorated to the point that she had to start hemodialysis. And right around that time, I just, that little nagging thought in my head, like, I would love to donate a kidney to Monica. I would love to do this. It became more than became kind of a fantasy. One that I really didn't think would happen. And actually I asked Monica what type of blood she had. And she told me she's type A. And I thought, oh, well, she is type O. And I thought to myself, well, I have type A, so I don't think there's any chance that I can donate a kidney to her, but maybe there'd be some other ways I could help her that way. And so she was very touched by that. Fast forward, she did undergo the workup at Frederick Hospital and got herself listed. Next slide, please. This is a picture of Frederick Hospital. And so Monica became established at Frederick with their transplant team, got listed. And then she, actually, next slide, please. She sent me a packet provided to her by her transplant team. And the packet was my application to become a donor myself. And she sent it by certified mail. I was not home. I don't know why she chose to do that, because I think she really wanted to make sure I got it. I was not home, so I had to go to the post office. So that delayed things a few days, but I remember excitedly filling out the paperwork at the kitchen table. And I think it was things like your height and your weight and your medical history, you know, check boxes of all kinds of things, and maybe short essays about why you were considering donation. So I passed the first phase, and then the RN for the transplant team set up a phone interview with me, and that was maybe a half hour or hour long, and I passed the second phase. So then in April of 2016, I did undergo a full day of testing. I got to meet the entire transplant team. Really kind of learned their roles. The RN on the team, there were several that I worked with that were just fantastic, all amazing, caring, wonderful people. And really, I learned so much just from whenever there was downtime, they seemed to have time to talk to me, which I really appreciated because I had so many questions, and on a professional level as well as on a personal level. The nephrologist on the team, kind of really explained did a full physical assessment, and then also explained some of the pros and cons, or the risks. The social worker on the team explained to me some of the psychosocial things, the body image, just kind of address some of that stuff. And then they also really want to know, why are you considering doing this? Are you feeling pressured to do this? That's a big theme, is they do not want anybody feeling pressured by anyone to be a donor. And they also certainly don't want anybody profiting, because I think that is illegal. But so they really need to ascertain, what is your motivation to do this? And the social worker also talked to me about the financial aspects. As a donor, there was absolutely no cost to me at all whatsoever. It was all completely within Monica's insurance, or I think she might be Medicare. So that was all paid for by another party. But the only potential cost to me would be if I lost any wages from work as a result of being off. In my case, I work at the VA hospital, and I had sick leave saved up, so I was able to use my paid leave to take time. But if that were a barrier, there are lots of fundraising programs that the social worker can help you with. I also got to meet the transplant dietitian, which was a good and humbling experience. She kind of filled me in on the diet, like when I would be in the hospital, and we just kind of talked about some of the long-term stuff. So that was good. Next slide, please. So that whole day of testing was really intense. And it wasn't just all these things that are listed here were not all done on one day, but a lot of it was. Started out with a glucose tolerance test, followed by lots and lots of blood, urine, and then a nuclear medicine test of my actual creatinine clearance. Not to brag, but my creatinine clearance was 100, which I thought was pretty good. I had an EKG. And then I should mention that in the past, I've had some issues with blood pressure. So for just 2 years before this time, I had been on some blood pressure medication, just a low dose of lisinopril. And then I went off of it because I didn't need it anymore. So that was part of my medical history, possibly a concern. When I was there in the office that day for that day of testing, my blood pressure was borderline high-ish. It was in the it was kind of like a systolic in the 140s, which that upset me and made me nervous, which of course, when they check it again, it goes up higher because you're stressed out about your blood pressure. Because of that being high, the nephrologist did tell me that she was sort of on the fence about me being a donor. And that was really disheartening, humbling and disheartening, because I really, really wanted to do this for my friend and for myself, not just for her. I wanted to do this. And so it just kind of felt a little bit like a failure. And I also thought to myself, if the team is on the fence, then obviously the correct decision is no. I cannot do this if this team is on the fence. Another thing I should mention is the team that I worked with at Freighter, and this is probably true of all transplant teams. When you're a living donor, you are worked up by a team that is completely separate and independent of the team that is working with your recipient. So this team is really advocating for you and you only. Their job, I really came to learn, their job is to take this enthusiastic donor and find any reason possible why they should not donate. So I really look at it that way, and I think that's the way it has to be, because this is your own life that we're talking about, and we don't want to create a new dialysis patient in the future if we can possibly help it. The team was really, really good about explaining the risks and making sure you knew that you can bow out of the process at any point, up until the time they put you under general anesthesia for the surgery itself. No questions asked. And then just talking more about the testing, to me it was really exciting to, I mean, first of all, cool to be able to get these different tests for free of charge, just to see where my own state of health is. So I got to do a stress test, and probably I think that might be because I had the previous blood pressure palpitation issue. So I had to sprint on a treadmill to get my heart rate high enough. And so I passed that, and then an echocardiogram to look at your ejection fraction and the valve conditions, the conditions of your valves and your heart size. The CT of the abdomen was really cool. They were, they inject a dye into you, and then they look at your kidney anatomy to make sure the vessels all look good and which kidney they're going to take. The liver, the lungs, the heart, they're just looking at everything about you. Even an ophthalmology exam, which they want to look at end organ damage and make sure that there is none of that anywhere in your body. So, so yeah, that was good. I have to say probably the worst part of the testing was for me the ophthalmology exam. I'd never had one before, not a full one. I'm a really, really squeamish person. I don't even like to give blood. To me, this was easier because you're under general anesthesia. So the ophthalmology exam, I remember that this was done at Freighter. The nurse came in and said, okay, we're going to give you some drops to numb your eyes. And I just heard numb your eyes. And when she walked out of the room, I actually sort of blacked out. I don't think she was aware, but that's how I am. I'm kind of a squeamish person. So that's how it was. So after all of this testing, it was good to, and I should also mention that because of my blood pressure being high, they had to mail me a kit. It was a blood pressure machine that I had to wear for 24 hours. And it measured my blood pressure every 20 minutes around the clock. So when I'm sleeping, when I'm going to Target, when I'm sitting in my kids' band concert, I had this thing going off and making that sound every 20 minutes. And then the first time I did it, it didn't get enough good data, so I had to do it again. And the second time, I passed. So I was really very happy to hear that I was considered to be in good enough health to be a donor. And no longer was the team on the fence after I went through all of this testing. So that was very encouraging. Let's see, I think we'll go to the next slide. Okay, some more things about oh, and I should also mention interesting things. I was 48 years old at the time that I went through the testing. This is in 2016. So one thing I realized from the team is that for anybody under the age of 50, the criteria seem to be much more stringent compared to people who are older. And that makes sense because of the fact that the younger you are, the more years you have to live with reduced kidney capacity. And so if you're an older donor, we already know the trajectory that your health is on. You know, we'll know if you have diabetes or hypertension and how those numbers are looking. So being that I was 48, I was 2 years younger than 50, the criteria were much more stringent. And there seems to be that line of age 50 that things get a little bit more relaxed. And now I'm not claiming to be an expert. I'm not a professional member of the transplant team, but this is just kind of things I gleaned from that. So I was glad that this team was taking my health really, really seriously. And they were the ones that were going to, I wanted them to be comfortable that I could do this. Next slide, please. Okay, so once we got approved to be a donor, now is my time to start telling a little bit to my coworkers. So this was probably in about March of 2016, and I started to tell my supervisor that I was going to need a little time off, started confiding in a few of my coworkers, and I also work with 4 or 5 different nephrologists, and I told all of them what I was considering doing. And I found all of them to be really supportive. One of my nephrologists sent me links to about a dozen articles about risks for living donors. And I printed out every one of these articles, and I had highlighter pen in hand. And some of the articles were pretty daunting, talking about, you know, the multiple fold increase in risk of ESRD being a donor. However, you really have to look at these numbers very, very closely. This slide, I just kind of gleaned a few of my highlights from an article that did convince me that I think it's going to be okay. One of the things is, since I'm healthy, I passed all the tests, my lifetime, without donation, my risk of developing ESRD was about 0.14%. The general population has a risk of 3%. So I'm a tiny fraction of the risk of the general population. If I am a donor, my risk does go up quite a bit, but it's still under 1%. So when I thought this through, and of course they never tell you that your risk is 0, and I know that, I did know that, but that's why they are very, very careful about making sure that they're doing this with informed consent. This was really reassuring to read. Next slide, please. In preparing for this presentation, I also came across this really cool tool that I think would have been nice to have if I had known about it at the time. So you enter your age, your gender, your race, your blood pressure, just that information. And I determined from that at age 48, my 15-year likelihood of developing ESRD was about 0.05%. So again, pretty comfortable. Without donation, but with donation, it goes up 4-fold, but it's still very tiny. And also, being a white female, that is actually the best demographic to be a living donor. Interesting to point out. Next slide. Okay, preparing for surgery. Okay, this slide shows my friend Monica, and it was taken about 3 or 4 days before the surgery. And you can see the Band-Aids on her access site and the bruising. And at this point, she was pretty frail. She had lost a lot of, she didn't lose a lot of weight. She was never overweight, but she definitely developed what I would consider to be signs of malnutrition. Her legs especially were real thin, and her appetite was not great. Her energy level was low. Hard to say how much of this is the lupus and how much of this is the end-stage kidney disease on dialysis. She also, I remember 1 or 2 times when I took her home from dialysis, I helped with transportation, very seldom, but once in a while, watching her struggle to walk up 2 or 3 steps. So she was pretty tired, and this was taking a toll, no question. Next slide. So just maybe a week or so before our surgery, which is in July, a group of my coworkers got together and gave me a little going away party. They served jelly beans in honor of my kidneys. And I have to say my coworkers were really great. I needed about 3 weeks off of work, and they were wonderfully supportive. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so this picture was taken the night before surgery. My parents flew in from Michigan. Monica's sister flew in from Tanzania to stay with her for a month. Monica's the one in glasses in the back, and then her sister's next to her. And Joyce, her sister, brought African dresses and shirts for every member of the family, including my parents, my own sister, each of my kids. In this picture, you see my son, one of my daughters, my husband. So we each got beautiful dresses from Africa in honor of this situation. And another really cool thing is that Monica's African sisters did a prayer dance for us. So we were sitting in chairs and they were laying hands on us and praying and dancing around us. And it was just a really, really cool thing. So I really went into surgery feeling very supported, very just positive. Next slide. This is a picture I took in Finland a few years ago. I thought it was fitting to post on Facebook the day of the surgery. Okay, Monica, let's do this. Next slide. Now I'm going to back up and tell you another kidney donation story that happened 1 week to the day before Monica and I had our surgery. And the way I found out about this one is it was a huge article in the Sunday Journal Sentinel. It was a story of Derek Mosley, who's a judge in Milwaukee, who received a kidney from his very good friend, also a judge, Joyce. I'm sorry, her name is Joanne Ehring. And what was so cool is the fact that they had photojournalists who they showed the entire process too. So it was a whole write-up about their friendship, their surgery, and the cameras went into the surgery room, into the operating room. There were color photos, and there was also an accompanying Journal Sentinel online edition. So I got to see, and this actually happened in the same hospital, Frederick Hospital, same surgeon, same operating room, 1 week before our surgery. So this is Sunday before our Wednesday surgery, and I'm reading in the Sunday paper all about my surgery. We later became friends. Monica and I became friends with Derek and Joanne and actually celebrated we each had kidneyversary parties 1 year after the surgeries, and we each attended each other's parties, and it was really fun. So the pictures I'm going to show you next are actually of Joanne's surgery, but they look exactly like mine. Next slide. Our surgery took place on July 28th, 2016. And I mentioned earlier that my blood is type A, Monica is type O. I would not be able to donate blood to Monica. However, because of the miracle of modern medicine, I was able to donate my kidney to her. It's called ABO incompatible, and it was a direct donation. To me, that was a little bit of a miracle because of the fact that Monica and I are as random of two people there could possibly be on the planet. Two different races, two different sides of the globe where we grew up. And yet it did work out that I could donate directly to her. I am not an expert in being able to tell you how or why that could happen or how they determined that would work, but it did. So I know that she had to go through a procedure, plasmapheresis, some plasma exchanges, I think maybe before and right after, and for several weeks after the surgery, she had to go through these plasmapheresis exchanges. And I think she might have an additional medication she needs to take because of it. Don't quote me on that though. Some of the basics about the surgery, I think the surgery itself might have taken 2 or 3 hours. I'm not sure. I remember waking up. The kidney itself in Monica, once it was transplanted, put out 17 liters of urine. I think they must have really been pumping her full of fluids, and that kidney did its job and put out 17 liters on day 1. So we were very proud of that kidney. Monica was in the hospital a little bit longer than I. I was there for 3 days. I was back to work within 3 months. 3 weeks, I'm sorry. And the entire process from workup to date of surgery was 5 months. Okay, prepare for some pictures now. Next slide. Here's me going into surgery. All happy, but I don't remember anything after that. Next slide. This is a picture in the operating room. My transplant surgeon, or my surgeon, Michael Zimmerman, I believe he's actually a vascular surgeon. He did a laparoscopic surgery. I have an incision that's about 2 inches long on my abdomen. It's a vertical incision. And then I have 2 smaller, much smaller incisions where the cameras went in. And so it came out through my abdomen as I'm laying on my back. Next slide. This is the kidney, not mine, Joanne's. And this picture really was pretty daunting for me to look at in the paper 4 days before my surgery. It kind of made it real for me. A part of my body is coming out. Next slide. This is a picture of them taking the kidney to the recipient who is waiting and all prepped for surgery. Next slide. So surgery was over. I do remember, boy, when I got a chance to be a patient instead of being a provider, and it is really different being on that side of things. I do remember pain. I remember no appetite, which is unusual for me. I remember just not wanting to get out of bed, but they make you get out of bed the first day. And I remember just like retching and feeling horrible. And the nurse that was there was just the right combination of tough and gentle. And she's like, I know you can do this. So she made me stand up, and I'm retching, and then she made me walk. And I needed that combination of tough and tender. So that worked well. This photo was taken probably not that day, but maybe the next day. They do purposely separate the donor and the recipient. We were on the transplant floor at Frederick Hospital, but they put you on different sides of the unit, I think on purpose, so that, and I think I get it. I think it's just too much stimulation to have everybody that knows each other in similar rooms or close by rooms. And it gives you incentive to have to walk because you really want to see your friend. So I'm putting my hand on my abdomen because I remember just that pain of, you feel like your guts are going to fall out. So you got to put your hand there to hold it in. Really, as far as the physical aspect of this, the scar is the only thing that I really reminds me on a daily basis that I had the surgery. Everything else is the same. Next slide, please. As I said, the staff at Frederick was so phenomenal. This is a picture of Stacy, one of the transplant RNs. I put her picture in here because, for one thing, she spent a lot of time with me and just really gave me a lot of information. But what is really cool is she herself is a living donor. She had donated to her then boyfriend, now husband, 17 years before this point. So she was really, just gave me a really good positive living example of a living donor that I could relate to. Next slide. This is another Stacy. She's an LPN who took care of me when I was in the hospital. She also was a living donor to her nephew a year before. And so these are just 2 of many wonderful people that I met. And I just think when I think of my experience in the hospital, it was nothing but positive. It was so good. And you learn so much just from the kindness and caring of the people. And another thing I would say is that I think when we're as providers, we don't really realize how much the people that take care of us really impact us. Okay, did I say that right? What I mean is, when someone's in the hospital, we may not realize how much those providers mean to the patient. We impact people more than we realize. And I learned that when I was being taken care of by the nurses, the doctors, all the other interdisciplinary people, how much they impacted me. And likewise, all of us are impacting our patients more than we realize. Next slide. So how has my practice been altered? Many ways. I am a very different person as a result of this experience. And I'm just flipping through to find my notes because I kind of got, so my practice is definitely different in that I had the chance to become a patient instead of a clinician. It really broadens and deepens your perception. It's something I can't really put into words, but anybody who's been an inpatient or an outpatient, anybody who's been a patient can start to see more what the patient experience is. So I think it's good for us as clinicians to get that chance to be customers. So one of the things I found, it was stressful and humbling, getting all the testing, the vitals, the height, the weight, the BMI, the blood pressure. It's a little bit humbling. You know, I'm a dietitian. I should be the picture of health. But I definitely have areas to improve. So, and I also realized kind of the process of surgery and how you feel afterwards, and kind of like now I get it when I'm talking to a patient who's post-surgical. Well, I don't think I should expect them to be eating really well. I know it takes a few days to get that appetite back and get the bowels moving and really feel like eating. So don't expect too much of that post-surgical patient. And don't try to have a long, in-depth discussion about diet with a post-surgical patient. Kind of realize that. As far as lab work, just to mention, I really like to look at lab work, and especially when it's my own lab work, it's interesting. So my baseline serum creatinine was 0.89. After surgery, it went up as high as 1.56. It then went down to the 1.0s. And then maybe a year after surgery, it was up as high as 1.2, which really, really freaked me out. But nobody on the transplant team batted an eye on that. Well, maybe one eye. But they told me this is really not unexpected. And then a year, maybe 6 months after that, my most recent creatinine was 1.08. So it's clearly above the 0.89, but it's holding steady in the 1.0s. So it's just interesting to realize, you know, I have a different, my level of kidney function is a little bit different now that I only have one. I think that one kidney is very healthy, but I definitely need to, and that brings me to my second point, walk the talk. I need to do everything I can to keep my remaining kidney healthy. That means adequate but not excessive hydration. One interesting thing about labs is that I had been making a huge effort to hydrate. And then one of my lab results showed a slightly low serum sodium, which made me think, maybe I shouldn't be pushing that much. Maybe there is a slightly finer line of over and under. I don't know. So I don't try to push it as much as I did before. My serum potassium in the past had always been kind of in the lower end of normal, mid 3s. Now it's more in the mid 4s. Still normal. I do not make any restrictions on my diet in potassium. I do certainly restrict sodium. But that's just interesting to note. So I don't know if that's difference in my diet or if it's a difference in my kidney function. Don't know. My next point would be having more empathy and rapport and credibility and connection with my patients. So I don't necessarily wear this story on my sleeve. I mean, I want to share it, and yet I don't want to come across as, look at what I did, pat me on the back, I'm wonderful. That is not ever what I want to come across as. But on the other hand, if I don't share the story, I think miss an opportunity to help inspire people. And again, it's a story. It's something that you can't argue with. This is my experience. It really puts all the information into a picture for the patient. So I think when I judiciously share the story with patients, and it's only when I feel the timing is really right, and it's And actually the patient population I really especially enjoy working with, I work with a CKD stage 4 clinic at the VA. And, oh, am I out of time? Am I out of time? Hello? Hello?
You can still finish up it. Our next presentation actually begins at 2:20, so you can still.
What time is it now? I'm sorry, I lost track
Only
of time.
2 o'clock, so you're good.
2 o'clock.
Sorry, Karen, I just
another
pushed
10
the
minutes.
wrong button.
Yeah, you're sorry about that.
Okay, where am I? I'm almost done.
No, you're good.
Okay, so yeah, I'm on the second last slide. Okay, let's see. So I do judiciously share the story with my patients, and I do find when I do, it really does. It's like a light bulb goes on, and it's really cool. I can't explain it, but you just it's pretty cool. It's a connection that is really cool, and it's more. I'm approaching it more from the angle of, this is something you could do too. I'm a normal person. I'm a regular person, and my friend is a regular person. And so I talk to them about the living donor aspect, if they have people in their lives, because a lot of them say, I don't want to burden my family with this, but I can say, well, I can't speak to the specifics of your family, but I can tell you that they may want to, maybe they may not even have considered this before. I view myself as really, my role on the interdisciplinary team is to promote, it's a little bit beyond the scope of an RD, but it's all of our jobs to support the notion of transplant. And so I also share my flawed and human side, because I know that I don't have a perfect diet. I know I'm good with exercise. I'm definitely plant-based, and but there's a lot of room for improvement in my own diet. So I understand the humility side of that. I think I've improved my rapport with my colleagues as well. Just having confided in my nephrologists, I got to participate in a research study on nephron size. It's kind of strange having one of my nephrologists that I work with professionally doing an ultrasound on my kidneys for his research study. That was different. Next slide, please. The community impact has been pretty cool too. So one thing has been meeting other kidney donor recipient pairs. I've had a number of chances to share our story publicly. I've made a number of presentations at various places, churches, and some businesses. And we actually had 2 spots, Monica and I, on The Morning Blend, which is a TV program locally here in Milwaukee. And that was exciting, scary, but exciting. And another really good thing is that we've had the chance to meet other donor recipient pairs. I mentioned Joanne and Derek. And then another really cool pair that is, there's a music teacher at Milwaukee Lutheran High School. He's African-American, and he received a kidney from a Caucasian person. So one of the things, in 2016 in Milwaukee, there were some instances of really strained race relations. I think that our stories really were positive stories about race relations. And I think there is that aspect the platform to be able to promote living donation and kidney transplant to minority communities. We have a really good platform. And just to update you on Monica, and then I'll be finished. Monica is really doing well. She's thriving. Looks 10 years younger, I think. She is able to go back to work. She is working as a Swahili interpreter in local hospitals, and she also has opened her own business. She sells African clothing, some of which she sews herself. And at her business place, she's met some people in the Hmong community, one of whom had a kidney transplant, and another who is looking for a donor for her husband. So this story just keeps growing and growing and growing. And it's just going to be kind of cool to see where it goes next. So thank you for your time. Thank you. Any questions? I'm looking at somebody can read me the chat. Or let's see.
That was an amazing presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate you bringing that aspect. So.
I just want to say I was expecting a group of 15 or 20 of people I know in Wisconsin. I was shocked that it's like 170, including someone from my internship at Heinz VA in Chicago.
Oh, cool.
So excited.
So cool.
It's really fun. And this is all flowing much more smoothly than I thought it would. So kudos to all of you doing this, organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you. A little bit of practice can take people a long way, I'll tell you what. Well, we appreciate that. That's for sure. We really appreciate your time today and sharing with our group. So very.
I have a question, Karen. Just quickly, so when you presented the idea that you wanted to donate to your family, your husband and your kids, how did they react?
Oh, that's a great question. I didn't even get into that, did I? My husband was very supportive. He's standing right here listening to me in the basement here. Wonderful. He was wonderful. My kids were supportive. I mean, when I presented to them what I was thinking, they knew that I was not going to change my mind. The one person who really had a hard time was my mom. She's a registered nurse, but she came around. And actually, another thing I didn't even mention is that an unexpected blessing of all of this is that our families, my family and Monica's family, many of whom are in Tanzania, some of whom are here, and her community, we've become so close. And it's just been like, I have this family that I haven't even met yet. And we're actually planning a sister's trip. Me and my sister want to travel to Tanzania to visit her sister and her family. So I have family on the globe that I haven't met yet. That's cool.
Very cool.
Are people,
there is
I see somebody's good question. Are people currently on hypertension meds disqualified for donating, or is it dependent on other factors? I think the team is looking at, and I'm not a professional, I'm a layperson here. This is my impression. I know that the nephrologist told me that at age 48, if I had been on hypertension meds, she probably wouldn't have considered me. But since I was off of them, she was on the fence because that day my blood pressure was high. I think if they were age 50 and above, that criteria would relax, because, and I don't know why, like if you're 49 or 51, but it seems like that age 50 is a solid line in the research, and it's all research based. So that's the best I can say. I think they would consider it, but yeah, it depends on your age and your other health things.